In a second, I'm going to hand over to Peter Topman. So Peter, just in case anybody doesn't know, Peter is one of our, I guess, our senior qualitative specialists and researchers, and he's well known for many of his, I think, very insightful and engaging conference papers that he has done in this side of the Atlantic and the other side of the Atlantic, many sides of the Atlantic, in fact. So without more of my rambling, I'm going to hand over to Peter now. Peter, over to you.
Great. Hello, everyone. You can see just how senior I am now from the picture in the corner of your screen there. Thanks, Alex, for the introduction. I'll try to live up to it. This, as you probably know, it's why you're here. This is going to be a discussion about a qualitative researcher segmentation we did a while ago. And I'm going to take you through the segments. Hopefully that will generate some debate in itself. But an important part of today is actually thinking about how the segmentation landed, firstly amongst qualitative researchers themselves. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then a little bit later on, we'll talk about some initial conversations we've had with clients and how they feel about it. And the whole point of today is actually to build on those initial conversations and start a kind of broader conversation with clients, because to be honest, we've talked this to death with actual qualitative researchers, and I think they're still talking about it all by themselves in a little room, whatever. But clients, we want your point of view. So, firstly, then, why on earth did we commit our time to doing a qualitative researcher segmentation? And to be completely fair and honest with you, the original plan was a little bit of kind of popcorn for a conference that we were involved with. So the AQR conference last year, it's all about AI and heavy subjects and so on. So we kind of thought, wouldn't it be fun just to do a qual segmentation study and give people an excuse to talk about themselves? And it was fun. And that to plan, it was fun, but the reality also, I think, was a little bit surprising in terms of how passionate people got, okay, and how kind of heated's too strong a word, but how kind of challenging some of the conversations that people were having between the segments actually became. It was more than just popcorn, and there's some interesting conversations. I mean, it's not Dostoevsky, but there were some really interesting themes coming out, which we will share with you. So that was a kind of the intention, if you like, and the reality of our motivations, really. But let's give you a little bit of background about the how. You've talked about the why, what about the how? Essentially, the budget dictated how we approach this. And I'm not going to get into the details how we did the segmentation. Our Y-Catcher team were the experts at that. But given that the budget was kind of zero, we reached out for our increasingly good friend AI to help us generate some initial thoughts on what those segments might be. And after kind of muddling around for ages trying to find the right question, we finally got a question that seemed to kind of be returning some kind of segments that kind of made sense to us and resonated with us. And that's what you'll see. But they were incredibly crude. And there were too many. I think there were about 6 or 7 initially, and there's lots of overlapping and so on. And some of the kinds of really lacked insight and direction. So what we did was a human refinement section, and there is the most human of all people there. I kind of led this bit. I'm to blame for this. And essentially what we did, we had some conversations with qual researchers about what their job meant to them and what they liked and what the frustrations were, all those sort of things. But we also turned that into a kind of a qual questionnaire and got about kind of think about 100 people in total, 100 qualitative researchers, US mainly, UK mainly, but also with a kind of sizable minority in the US, completed that questionnaire, sent it all in, and I poured over it like a madman, trying to kind of make sense of it and marry it with what we had from the AI generation to bring something a bit more meaningful together. Never thinking it would be perfect. Indeed, it is not, as you'll see. What happened then was we actually presented the segment to the AQR conference. And that's when there were kind of conversations and discussions. We molded things a little bit as well. But when we're kind of doing this, we're kind of thinking, this is a really interesting subject. For us, obviously, we're in the business, but I wonder what clients will actually make of it. And that's when we started to bring clients into the conversation. We hadn't had too many conversations till now, I think about 14 or 15, either on the phone or by email, or whatever. But it's been really interesting, and we want to hear more based on what we've got so far. So we'll talk about those initial client responses later, hopefully, to generate more conversation, because in some sense, they raise more questions at this point than they do kind of answers. So let's look at the segments. Okay. There should really be a drum roll here, but there isn't. So look, these are the four segments I'm going to talk you through. Innovators, traditionalists, humanists, and pragmatists. You can start forming your own opinion of what that might mean as we kind of carry on here. But just to say, this is still incredibly crude segmentation, a light touch, I think we're meant to call it, rather than crude. But essentially, all researchers, certainly all Jigsaw researchers, but I think all Qual researchers generally, had traits from all of these segments. What we've done today is just kind of, or what we did for the segment is we just kind of identify where the primary inclination and drivers lie in different kind of people. So let's go through this. Let's start with the innovators. Let me just move myself out of the way there. So essentially, innovators believe that Qual has to evolve to stay relevant. Let me get rid of my picture there. Qual has to evolve to stay relevant. Otherwise, it will just kind of wither away. And what they're proudest of in their in the way they do Qual is in the pushing boundaries of Qual. And that doesn't just mean tech boundaries. We're not just talking about tech people here. We're actually talking methodological innovation, and also in this, they like this phrase, intellectual innovation. So if you think about when BE started making inroads into research about 10, 15 years ago, we probably think that was driven by innovators rather than other kind of segments. They're proud of their creativity, their willingness to shake things up. And of course, who they're most critical of, it's those who are a little bit complacent about Qual and see that what we do at the moment is almost kind of like, sacrosanct. Okay, so a little bit of a quote to capture them. Change is not an option, so we should embrace it. Finding new ways to connect with people is the beating creative heart of Qual. So welcome to the innovators. Now let's talk about the traditionalists. This is the second segment. So they kind of believe that Qual is reliant on proven methodologies and analytical rigor. And what they're proud of is their mastery of classic and enduring approaches, the rigor they put into analysis, which allows them to make interpretive leaps. They're also very kind of into training of theory and practice, both their own and they ongoing in their kind of dedication to improve, if you like, but also kind of they often get involved in actually training others, and they really enjoy that. What worries them most is what they might call the commodification of qualitative research, and by that we kind of mean the top line culture. I suppose you could say this. They might describe it as kind of how you do groups one night, and then there's no real time for the analysis and so on. Then we have to do a top line, and then there's a debrief. They really value the rigor and the process. A quote to sum that up: some elements of Qual are non-negotiable. Compromise on those, and we risk losing the trust we've worked so hard to build as a profession. The humanist. Okay, so as it's probably given away in the title, they believe Qual is a way of giving everyone in society a voice. And as you'll see when we go through these all probably tap into some element of your kind of way of looking at the world as well. I mean, so many people get into research, and qualitative research in particular, following that kind of democratic edict or that kind of more political sense that it's bringing everyone into the conversation. And they really embody this kind of perspective. What they're proudest of is their work when it makes a difference in the world, even in small ways. The amplification of unrepresented voices. The sort of research is all about capturing lived experience of those marginalized groups. And they're a little bit critical of not commercial focus in its sense, but an overwhelming commerciality where the humanness can sometimes be lost. They live in the real world to some degree. They know that money has to be made, but it's just a focus and the way the project might be ran. Qual research gives a voice to the people who don't get a seat at the table. Lastly, and really not least, is the pragmatist, okay? And pragmatists believe that Qual is at its heart about enabling better decisions for clients. It's not an end in itself. And what they're proudest of is that trusted advisor status, their long-term relationships with clients, the way they work with clients in insight application and making sure that the research is actionable in that particular kind of working culture. Sometimes these are dualists, and this is certainly true in Jigsaw, who do qual and quant. And sometimes these people have a kind of researcher identity more than a kind of qual identity. They still love qual. And what they're critical of is that kind of purism we talked a little bit earlier about, I guess, the traditionalists, but others too. And here's a quote: practicality over purity. In dynamic business environments, it sounds rather pompous. This person wasn't pompous, it's the way I'm reading it. Practicality over purity. In a dynamic business environment, achieving good enough insights quickly can be more valuable than striving for perfect data collection or analysis. Okay, maybe they are a little bit pompous. Okay, so that's them. Okay, that's all of them. And just a few numbers here. As a quality, I'm immediately slightly discomforted by the appearance of numbers on my chart, but I've learned to live with it. So you may be able to guess, but this is actually an order of size. It's all indicative sizes, of course, very rough. But pragmatists, traditionalists, humanists, innovators. So pragmatists and traditionalists, both the UK and the US, are significantly the most represented groups. The humanists and the innovators, we must treasure them. They're rarer. Okay, so that's what we threw at researchers. They're kind of slightly kind of looking, I could see their eyes kind of taking it all in when we presented this to the AQR conference. Didn't quite know what to make of it, but I guess their initial response can be kind of really seen as this: don't box us in. Guess what, people? The segmenters don't like being segmented themselves. So as humans, we all want to think we're individuals and we're unique. And qualitative researchers really do seem as chameleons. They're able to adapt seamlessly from client to client, from project to project. And there's obviously some truth in that. People have to adapt. Researchers have to adapt. But even accepting the spirit of the segmentation study, they did argue that often they came up with the sort of expressions you'd expect people to come up with when they see a segment that they're meant to be in. They kind of say, well, you know, I am a traditionalist, but I have a strong undercurrent of innovation. Or they might say, oh, I am a humanist, but it doesn't mean I lack the business skills of a pragmatist. I'm very aware of that. So I had lots of conversations like that. And of course, they're right as well. No one is just one of these drivers, if you like, or segments. They are a mixture of all of those. So we can understand that kind of thing coming back. But having said that, it didn't stop them kind of talking about colleagues or friends as a particular segment. I know a lot of pragmatists, so they were the exceptions rather than the actual, rather than the kind of world as a whole. It's very human. We're humans as researchers. So there's that kind of aspect. A quote to sum this up, which I think is quite amusing. There's no one me. What does a client want? And hey, presto, that's my segment. Well, I think you're overplaying it there a little bit, sir. I know what you mean. But are you a pragmatist by any chance? And of course, he was the ultimate pragmatist, as you could tell. So the second thing that kind of came through loud and clear when we shared this with other qualitative researchers was this idea of the name. What's in a name? Everything, it seems, is in a name. And it's another human trait, isn't it, that we have a sensitivity to names or labels. But you probably won't be surprised to know which of the segments were less happy with the label than others. I was going to ask you to guess, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm sure you could. It was the humanists and the innovators who had a big smile on their face, because those are aspirational names. Okay, who wants to be a pragmatist or a traditionalist? There's a quote here from a US guy. I will not put a US accent here, but which kid grows up wanting to be a pragmatist and traditionalist? Who are you, J.D. Vance? So these aren't aspirational terms. It's just when we do segments in the kind of the real working world, we often come across this. If we ever present them to actual real people, you get this. And just because we do that a lot to others doesn't mean we kind of enjoy it ourselves. So names are really important. So bearing that in mind, a little bit of democracy was introduced at the conference. And we asked pragmatists, okay, we hear you, okay? You don't like being a pragmatist, don't sum up what you are. What names what can you do better than AI? And the things we tended to get were consultant. That kind of makes sense, but I think it misses the fact that these are people who actually do research. They're actual practitioners as well. Another one was a strategist. Yeah, I can definitely see that. There is that strong business strategy in particular, brand strategy, definitely. But it doesn't necessarily, for others, feel it covers everything they do and their kind of sense of passion about research. So there's debate, but not really getting there. What about the traditionalist? Well, they don't like their name. So what do you want to be called? About an expert? Yeah, no. Okay, one more guess. A guru. We think not. Okay, there's aspirational and there's crazily aspirational. So we remain defeated so far. AI so far, with the names it selected, has actually outperformed the human creativity of qual researchers. Maybe clients can do better. And let's turn to clients now. Now, just to make this clear, this is based on some conversations we've been having with clients over the last few months, last year really. And there have been conversations fairly informal and fun, whatever. But some things are coming out. We really want to test out what those things are. But firstly, what were those reactions? I was kind of expecting a cool and rational assessment of the segments from a very kind of business focused point of view. And there was some of that. But often clients actually reacted emotionally and they identified particularly and passionately with a particular segment. Often heard that with innovators, but also traditionalists. So there's that. But on the other hand, they understood that their main role is to play the pragmatist. So that's where they're so close to that segment. It's kind of very much overlapping on that role, and they could be kind of partners. So what do they think of the segments overall? Well, the great news is, I think this is great news, they really loved the idea of diversity. So the great thing is Jigsaw doesn't have to fire anyone. The actual clients can see a real value in all of the segments we actually presented with them. So that's a great thing. And in particular, they like the idea of having a kind of an agency team that had different kind of people, so they can actually, the diversity in itself was interesting for any project, but sometimes some projects might actually be more useful or appropriate to certain segments. For example, if it was a big project with a lot of external scrutiny, a traditionalist might be the choice to lead it. If it was a kind of a project where other research hadn't really cut through, then maybe an innovator was kind of needed. If it's going to be a strong stakeholder or a need for immersion in the culture, maybe pragmatists would play a role there. So they have pros and cons of all of these individually within that kind of acceptance. So pragmatists, yeah, they're the guys, you know, they're the ones that we need to work on a day-to-day basis. But there are a few negatives for all of these. And sometimes a sense that pragmatists can be a little bit too quick to get to the brand implication or the business case. And sometimes they may miss some of the peripheral human stuff going along that others might catch. Innovators, well, what's the pros and cons of them? Well, the innovator was and tapped into this kind of broader, I think, research kind of love of new things and testing things and so on that clients and researchers share. So they love the idea of having a muse like that. But sometimes there was a sense that, you know, let's not, well, I guess them having a bit of innovation bias. So what works, works. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Traditionalists, well, you know, gravitas, people who really knew research as kind of an advisor on the process, also making sure everything's done properly and thoroughly and kind of robustly, if you like. We need traditionalists, but they can be a little bit, how to put this politely, just a little bit kind of too bound to process, maybe sometimes a little bit not quite quick enough to act. I mean, these are slight stereotypes, but you can get the kind of picture. And the humanists, well, again, that was another group that the people in research, really all of us have a kind of, I guess, a kind of sympathy with or empathy for, because so many people do get into research for that idea of bringing people into the process. And I think as the social justice movement has grown, particularly in client organizations, their role, the humanist role, has become even more important. But of course, the downside might be, well, you know, guys, it is about the bottom line at the end of the day. And it's not saying that humanists don't know that, but sometimes there's a little bit of kind of enthusiasm and to balance out, I guess, and to manage. So all good. And there were different roles that these people might have in the company, in any particular project. Practice on the account lead, innovator, the design muse, the traditionalist, the research lead, and the humanist, the kind of conscience of the project. So all lovely and equal there. So that's what we've had so far. Lovely to hear more, makes a real conversation somehow. But we kind of thought it'd be fun to look at the Jigsaw team in the kind of through the lens of these segments. Yeah, we thought that'd be fun. Whether it's fun for you, not quite so sure, but it's fun for us. So these silhouettes, I recognize them all, love them all dearly. But where do they kind of come out in terms of segments? I was going to make you guess. I'm not going to make you guess. But the first group here is, let's have a look, is this group of fine people. Who are they then? What segment they belong to? Can we guess? No, because that will lead to stereotyping. Let me tell you, it is the pragmatists. What about this lovely group of 5? Again, I'm sure you can have a guess, but I'm not going to let you. They are humanists. What about these 5 people? Look at them all there. No clue there that they might be traditionalists. And actually, when I look at those 5, particularly some of them, I'm thinking maybe guru is the right term for these people after all. Maybe that's just me. But guess who the cool guys are? And Alex was smiling when he found this out, that he is one of the innovators. I hate him for it. I almost decided to make him something else. But truth will out, Ross and Alex are our cool guys in the office. So just a few final thoughts here before we get any questions from you, because I've talked too much. What did we kind of learn from doing this? Also, we've had some fun. But we also, I think more seriously, everyone in the office who's done the questionnaire have found out who they are. I think it's made them think, okay, if I'm that, then maybe I need to focus a little bit more on that. So it's just a bit of self-awareness. And I think on a company level as well, it's been useful just to see that chart earlier on, just to make sure clients like the diversity. We need to keep that balance. You know, it's not going to dictate who we hire on a literal level. because all of these people can do everything. But if some people have a certain passion for something, then maybe we should make sure that they're on those kind of projects. So there's kind of management side to this as well. But what we also learned from the client responses we've had is that, you know what, clients are as diverse and emotional about this stuff and passionate about this stuff as core researchers themselves. So that's why, and this is in no way intended as a threat, the Jigsaw client segmentation, perhaps coming to a webinar near you, but let us know in the chat whether you would be interested in hearing a client segmentation. Everything we do is driven by clients. So if you're interested in that, we can definitely do it. Though we're kind of curious anyway. So guys, that's all the talking I'm going to do. Let's see if there are any questions. Alex, do you want to come on board and be the question guy?
Yeah, hi, thanks Peter for that. And thanks for a great presentation. So yeah, I have had a couple of questions come to me on this. One of them is there a questionnaire that we can share with people so they can sort of figure out who they are, like to do their own segmentation of themselves?
That is indeed. It's a very short and down and dirty kind of thing, but it is something that we can send out to people who are interested. It takes less than 30 seconds to do it, and it's kind of fun. So yes, we can do that.
Someone just as a comment has said, love the idea. It's been fascinating to listen to. Somebody else has said, definitely want to hear about the client segmentation, not least because I rather believe one gets the clients one deserves. I had
very
a
true,
question.
very true.
We've had someone's just put their hands up now. I'm not sure whether we can actually accept a verbal question or whether it has to go in the chat, unfortunately. So if Hugh, you'd like to try and put your question in the chat, that would be great. Somebody else has said, just while we're looking at that, somebody else has said, classic problem segmentation, people spread across segments are more about needs and people. Clients like the diversity. So how can an agency put this to use in their own positioning? So how could an agency put, I guess, a diverse range of segments working for them to their advantage? How can they use that to position themselves?
Well, I guess you can show a range of content on your website that kind of captures some of those different kind of perspectives. You want to do it kind of more by implication, or you can quote this this segmentation if you want to make it more literal a connection. But I think that anything, whether it's following these segments or not, anything that suggests intellectual or emotional diversity within a research company is going to, by the sound of it, connect with clients. Okay, because they're very aware that those different perspectives bring different kind of lenses, but also kind of work together to create a kind of collaborative dialogue. So yeah, I think it's just really reflecting the diversity of kind of perspectives on what you talk about as an agency.
And do you think there's a perfect mix of segments within an account team or on a project? Can you be as simplistic as that?
I think a mixture is a main thing. I'm not going to get into hierarchy here, or I'll end up saying that as a traditionalist, we're the really important ones, which you probably sense in your insecurity, Alex. But I think it's probably more relevant at project level, actually. Do you know what I mean? In terms of if it's a kind of a project where you've done lots and lots of research before, and you haven't got anything, you need to look at the whole world in a different way. And that's where someone like you, Alex, or Ross, would be particularly interesting. But I think it's probably more on that. I think the diversity in itself is a strength, and making sure we cover as many of those as we can. But do remember, let's not take it too literally. We are all kind of chameleons too. So I think it's more relevant probably on a project level to think about it in that way.
Fantastic. And Steve has put in the chat there, I think clients want researchers who look like themselves. So I guess there could be some of that coming out. I think that's near enough it. We're just over time by 1 minute. I've got to say thank you for putting me in the innovator segment, Peter. That's very much appreciated without any bribery whatsoever. So I'll take that.
You look the
Um,
part. You really look the part.
well, again, thank you very much for that. Any final questions from anybody in the chat, please, or in the Q&A section before we wrap up? Okay. Well, look, thanks everyone for attending. As I mentioned before, we will be sharing the recording. And we'll also be sharing the deck. And apologies if we couldn't see or sort of respond to your question. Oh, hold on, there's one last one coming in here. So thank you for that one last one. Which type do we think will be rising in the future, which is going to be, I guess increasing in maybe
I
frequency?
think I don't know who asked that question, but it's really feed your mind security, which doesn't need any further fuel. I don't know. I think that the pragmatist is always going to have a very strong hand because they have such a strong client relationship and such an inherent understanding of client business. So all their kind of findings are kind of really grounded in the reality of the culture and the kind of challenge that businesses face. So the smart money, i.e. my money, would probably be still on pragmatists rising right at the very top and becoming dictators.
Okay, so with a slightly dark prediction, or maybe it's not a dark prediction, maybe it's a client-focused prediction of a pragmatist future. Thanks to everyone for attending. We'll send out those sort of follow-ups as I mentioned. If anybody has any final questions or wants to chat to us, please be our guest and get in touch. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, for attending. Thanks a
See you
lot.
later.
Bye bye. Cheers.